Hi there, it's Jen, and I have a bit of a different video today for you. I am going to be playing with some cardstock. The company called Cardstock approached me and asked me if they could send me some cardstock to play with, and I told them that I'm always on the lookout for a good white cardstock. So they sent me 3 different varieties of white cardstock. This one is called Cougar Cardstock White 130-pound cover, and it's 8.5 by 11. This one is 8.5 by 11, 110-pound cover, basis cardstock in white. And then the last one that they sent me is a pearl linen cardstock in an 84-pound version. And they're all 8.5 by 11. And I thought I would try these out because I wanted to try out a bunch of different mediums on them. I'm always looking for a good paper for stamping and for mixed media and watercolor and stuff. And so I thought I would just try out some markers and pens and different inks and things that I would use on these papers. And they have all sorts of different papers that they sell. It's at cardstock.com. They sell envelopes, cards, adhesive sheets, glitter, sparkle sheets, different colors of cardstock, thank you notes, envelopes. I don't know if I already said that, but they have all sorts of different cardstocks that you can check out and look at. And you can, I believe, you can customize cutting, scoring, drilling, all that kind of thing. So if you have a certain size of paper that you use a lot, especially if you're a card maker, I think this is great. You can have them send you a size that you use often. So that's just something to think about and to check out. Again, like I said, I'm going to be testing all of these mediums on all of the different papers. Now, I kind of imagine that the pearl linen cardstock will be something that I just use on its own and not with these other mediums on top of it, but I'm going to try it anyway and we'll see. And let's go ahead and get playing. Okay, so what I did was I went ahead and cut each paper into 5.5 by 4.25 inch sheets. This is the same size as a standard card front if you make cards. And I'm just going to be testing out my different mediums on this. Now, the Cougar cardstock in white, the 130-pound, is by far the thickest and the smoothest. It's very thick and it's very sturdy, almost like a very thin chipboard. It's really sturdy and it's got a very smooth finish. I decided I also want to test out Copic markers on these to see what they work like, so I'll be doing that too. This is the pearlized linen cardstock, and it's the thinnest, and it's got this gorgeous sheen. I don't know if you can really see that, but that's a fun one. And then you can definitely, I hope you can see the texture of that. And then the classic, let's see, this was classic pearl linen, and then this one is just the basis cardstock in white. And this has a little bit of a texture to it, almost like a watercolor paper, and so I'm interested to see how that takes watercolor, because it does have grooves and variations in it like a watercolor paper would. So we've got 3 different textures, 3 different weights, and you can see the colors are different too. So this is a white, a bright white, the Cougar cardstock, and then the basis cardstock is white, but it's a little bit more off, and then the pearlized one is obviously pearlier. So those are the cardstocks. The first thing I want to try is just writing on them, so I'm just going to use one of my favorite pens, one of each, and hello. My name is Jen. Let's zoom in a little bit for you here as I do these tests. Okay, so that's, I want to see if it smears. Looks like it does smear. This has a very, it's not as shiny, but it's a slick, very smooth surface. I'm sure that if I let it dry, it would not smear, but that's good to note. The other thing I wanted to see was the bleed. So if it bleeds through. Bleed through. Let's check that. I can't really see anything on the back of that. I also wanted to check out the Copic marker bleed through. So I'm just going to layer up like maybe 3 or 4 layers of color here. And that has hardly any bleed through. So if you are a single layer card maker, this might be a good one for you. I'll test out the stamping in a minute. But those are the 3 pens that I wanted to test. So that is good. And this one I think is not going to bleed. I can already tell. It's definitely not as slick of a surface. I'm just messy writing here. So hello, my name is Jen. Yeah, that one is a lot more color fast, or not color fast, but it doesn't smudge. Let's check out bleed through on this puppy. That's just with a Sharpie and not really anything. And then let's do Copics. Now, I probably wouldn't use Copic on this. It seems like it would soak in the color. But there's not a lot of bleed through there either. I just don't think this would be a good surface for that. But you know what? I'll test on a different piece of paper, stamping, and then we'll blend Copics on top of it to see how that works. Okay. Okay, so I think that this one might have my pen bleed a little bit, but it doesn't bother me to write on. That's something else I want. Yeah, so that does definitely smudge if you don't let it dry. That's okay. Let's check out bleed through on the Sharpie. Nothing. So that's nice. And I don't think I would use Copics on this. Oh, you can hear it. Can you hear that? That's like a kind of a slick. It's not really soaking into the paper. It's kind of resting on top of it. So there's no bleed through on that, but I don't think it hasn't soaked in, which is okay, but we'll see how that goes for blending. So that's what the pens look like on it. Next thing I want to try is stamping, I think. We'll start again with, I'll just do this in the same order. So this is again the 130-pound Cougar cardstock. Okay, so I wanted to try a couple of things. I want to try a solid stamp, and then I want to try an open stamp. So this one has a good solid, but not a good open stamp. So let me grab, okay, for the sake of coloring and for seeing how fine of a line it can get, I'll just stamp this little hedgehog. So go ahead and ink that up. So this is Tuxedo Black ink, Memento ink. Okay, it stamps really, really nicely. I want to see if it smudges. That doesn't smudge, not really anyway. And I could let it dry for another second or so. I will let that dry for another second because I want to color on it with Copic markers to see how they blend. But while I'm waiting, let me go ahead and stamp a solid image. Okay. So that worked really great. Let's go ahead and stamp it. Okay, so I also have pigment ink. So I'll just stamp the same images with a pigment ink. And that works fine. And the fine lines work great. And I also have just a regular ink pad. This is just a regular dye ink. So I wanted to try both pigment and dye ink. Okay. I want to see how it soaks into the paper and how smooth of an image I get. So it looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and color with the Copic markers now on this one and see how they blend. So generally, I'm not a great Copic colorer and I don't do it very often, but I do it sometimes. So our hedgehog is going to be blue. And I'm just going to do this little part here. So making sure that it's not smudging. And I'm just going to color in with the light color. Come back with the darker color. and add in a little bit here, and then come back with the lighter color and blend it out. And it looks like I'm getting pretty good blending here. Like, I think as good as any other paper that I would get. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. So that's good to know. And those look pretty good. The pigment ink is still drying a little bit, but the other inks are good to go. So I'm going to set this aside and let's try it on this other cardstock, which is the Basis cardstock, 110 pound. So I'll do the same thing. I'll stamp with the Memento ink, the hedgehog. Okay, nice clean image there. And let's do the more solid image. And that looks fine. So I'll do the nice fine image and the more solid image. Okay, both look fine. Not surprised there. What I'm wondering about more on this one is how clean, or how it's a more textured cardstock. So I generally like to stamp on a smoother surface. I'm going to go ahead and try the dye ink now. Oops, that might have been my fault that I didn't get that clean of an image because I rocked my stamp. Let's try it again. I'll just stamp it right next to it. I don't know what's up with me. Okay, well, I'm not getting that great of an image on that one. So let's just show you the difference here. First of all, we have a difference in paper color, but you can, I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but there's definitely a difference in the texture. You can see more texture in this stamping. I don't know if you can see it, but I definitely can. And so they both work pretty well. Let's try the Copic markers on here. I don't see, this isn't quite dry, I don't think. It's kind of smudging, actually, the ink. The black ink is smudging. So I think that this is going to soak up the ink more. Actually, it's blending pretty well. Let's see. It's blending out actually very well. I want to see if there's bleed. Like if I go right up to the edge of his face. This isn't good Copic coloring, but I just want to see if it bleeds over. Okay, I'm gonna let that one go for a minute. It doesn't look like the ink really dried all the way. I don't know. But it blended out fairly well. I still think I prefer coloring on this one, the experience of it. I don't know. Okay, so even though I probably wouldn't stamp on this linen textured pearlized cardstock, I'm going to for the purposes of this video, because sometimes you have a specialty paper that you want to try stamping on, so let's try it. So we have our little hedgehog, and let's do a little solid image as well. Definitely not getting as clean of an image with the Memento ink. Okay, so here's the pigment ink. Pigment inks are more paint-like and they rest on the surface of the paper. So we'll see how this goes. And I'm wondering if this will even dry on here because the surface of this paper is kind kind of slick. It's got a, you know, a coating on it. You can see how it kind of pooled up right there with that more solid image. And then we'll go to our gray ink, which is just a regular dye-based ink. Okay, definitely not as clean of an image. I feel like I need to let this dry for a minute. It's definitely smudging. So this one is going to have to dry. All right, I'm going to try the Copics, but I'm worried that it's going to, I don't know. Yeah, the black ink isn't dry and it's not really absorbing into the paper, so it's resting on the top, on the surface. So I definitely would not recommend this for Copic coloring. It blends really easily though because everything is sitting on the surface. So I don't know. You could try it, but I think you're better off not trying it. So there's that. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry a little bit, but I wanted to show you the difference between the pearl cardstock and the first 130 pound cougar cardstock, because you can see a big difference, I think, in the texture. First of all, in the texture, and also that affects the cleanliness of the image. So, but you can stamp on it, and in fact, the dye ink is dry and it worked great. The pigment ink will need another minute. You can see that it's still wet. So anyway, all right, so let's move on from stamping. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to check was how well they hold up to watercolors. So I've just got my watercolor palette here, which is very dirty, but I don't care. And I'm just going to just kind of play around for a minute with some paint. And I want to see how much water this can hold. So this is, again, the 130 pound Cougar White. And watercolor takes definitely a different, it's different on this thick paper. It's like, it's sitting on the surface a little bit. It's not soaking in, and it blends really easily, which is kind of cool, right? Let's try some quick little letters. Cool. And maybe it would be, I want to see if you can blend easily from one like kind of random color into another. So when I take the yellow into the pink here, how that's going to blend. Does it stay wet enough? And that's really, really pretty actually. It's not quite what I imagined, and I'm curious to see if I just leave a big pool kind of color, if it will, how it will dry. So I'm gonna let this kind of just do its thing. And see what it does. I'm just trying to see how colors blend on here. I'm not a big watercolorist or anything, but there's a little flower-ish. And we'll see how that goes. All right, let's do one more over here. All right, okay, so let's try this on. Now this is the paper that I thought kind of felt watercolory. This is the Basis cardstock. So on both of them, I'm not prepping the surface with anything. Okay, this is behaving much more like watercolor paper to me already. And let's see. The color looks very different. Ooh, I I like this for watercolor, I can tell already. Let's write a word. I'm just using a watercolor brush or a water brush, so I don't have to worry about. I'm wondering if when the watercolor dries, because the paper has a texture, if you'll get a little bit of texture. That was not a very cute way to write the word cool, but that's okay. Let's do the same thing we did before with the pink and the yellow on the bottom. And just see how they blend. Okay, the water, I mean, I'm going to put a lot of water on this one like I did on the other one, just up here in the corner. Now, if I was a RE, I'd have like a real watercolor test to show you, but I don't. And I'm not. So that's okay. Let's try a little wet on wet. So I'm going to put a whole bunch of wetness right here. I already put some color in it, but I'm going to just drop more color in and see how that turns out. And then let's just try a little flower here. And I'll drop a little bit of a darker color in the center. Purpley this time. And let's do some leaves. Oops, I got a little bit in my color there, that's okay. Okay, so there's watercolors on this one. They look very different, don't they? They take the color so differently. It's very interesting. I like them both actually, and I'll wait till they all dry to show you them together. But let's see if the watercolor works on the pearlized cardstock. That's an interesting experiment, I think. So let's try. So the paper definitely, it doesn't want to spread the color like the others did. Let's see how they blend. So there's definitely, I mean, you can still get your blending, right? Let's write a word. We'll write the same word. I don't think I have as much water going right now, so that's why it's so dark. Okay, and then this water brush is running out of water. Don't worry, I have another one. Let's do some blending down here at the bottom. I think I used a different color for this one, so if it looks different, that's why. Let's do some yellow and see how these come together. Okay, interesting. All right, let's do a whole bunch of water here at the top. Just layering on the water. I want to see how much water this can take and what the warping is like. So that's what I'm kind of just testing out here. And then we'll do a little flower. Definitely harder to get that shape going. Okay, and let's do a darker color in the center and some little leaves. The color doesn't soak into the paper, so it's kind of just resting there. I don't know how this one will dry. So I'm interested to see. Okay, so I'm going to let those dry and come back to them. But I want to do another one where I'm just going to layer on a whole bunch of water, pretty much. I want to see how much water this can take. I'm just throwing some color on here. Okay, so this is random. This is the Cougar cardstock again, and I am not caring about the fact that these are going to be colors that don't really go together. That's okay. I'm just wanting to see how much water it can hold. Okay, so here we go again with the basis cardstock. We'll just do a bunch of colors on this one too. Lots of water. This water brush is out of water. I'm using too much water. Okay, so I'm gonna just really load on the water because I want to see how well it's gonna do. So let's do a little bit of, oh, that's turned into a nice green. And we'll do some yellow. And I'm going to do some pink again, even though it doesn't really match. Oh, it's turned orange because I didn't clean off my brush well. That's okay. There's a little bit more of that pink color. All right. Whatever. Just want a lot of water on there. And then we'll see if the linen cardstock holds up. So there's a lot of water there. Okay, I'm going to go into some yellow. The water isn't flowing on this paper. It's not meant for watercolors, but I just, you know, as I said, I just want to see how it all works. Because this is what I will be using papers like this for. And let's just do a little bit of this peachy color. All right, random, random, random. I'm going to set all 6 of those cards aside to dry. Okay, next I want to see how it holds up to acrylic paint. That's something that I use often-ish. And I'm just going to use a palette knife to kind of spread this out. And I'm going to do a fairly thick layer. Well, I'll do a thin layer. I want to see how it spreads, like, does it soak in quickly? Like, this is, you can see that's not really soaking in. And I want to do a really thick layer to see how it holds up. Okay, so I think what I'll do is just, okay, that's the thick. And then let's spread it thin. And if I just barely touch it to the paper, what kind of results do I get? Let's see what happens if I barely touch this to the paper. I'm a hot mess already. Okay, so barely touching it to the paper. You get kind of a different look because this is a more textured cardstock. That's just good to know, right? All right, let's move that aside. Let's move that aside. Okay, here's the linen. So nice and thick at the top. Spread thin. And I'm trying to barely touch it. It's not working. I don't know if it's because I'm using this palette knife, and I don't usually use a palette knife like that. I usually use one with a flat edge, so I don't know why I'm using that one, because I should use what I would use, right? But I didn't. Okay, this one you can get a cooler texture on. So we'll see how these dry too. I'm gonna set those aside to dry because I want to see how they hold up to the mixed media. Next, I'm gonna try some modeling paste, and I'm kind of wondering the same thing. I'm wondering how it's going to dry. So I'm not going to do it through a stencil. I'm just gonna slap it on. Starting with the 110 pound. Or the 140 pounds, sorry. Okay, I think this modeling paste has reached its prime. I might have to try a different one. Okay, this one's better. Okay, so modeling paste definitely has a thickness and a texture to it, but I want to see if I lay it on thick, if it soaks up and warps the paper or no. So it spreads nicely enough. Okay, this is the 110 pound basics or basis. This is a pretty color. I should use it more. Okay, laying it on thick. And lastly, I'll try the linen, the pearl linen. So I'll lay it on really thick at the top, thinner at the bottom. Now, if you spread this one really thin, you can see the texture come through a lot, which is cool. I actually really like the way that looks. I think it's important to play with your supplies to know what they can do, because I wouldn't have thought that well, I guess I know that when I put something like this and spread it over a textured cardstock that I'm going to see the texture through, but particularly this linen texture, I really like the modeling paste on. Okay, once again, going to set these aside to dry completely. All right, and the last thing I wanted to try was some spray mist. So, I want to try a couple different things. I want to try, my Heidi Swapp Gold Color Shine is my most used spray mist, so I want to see how the droplets look when I use that. And I mostly use droplets and not actually spray, so. It's important to me if how the cardstock looks when I do these Heidi Swapp droplets. So I'm going to wait for that to dry. That's the Cougar cardstock. This one's the Basis cardstock. I'm going to drop a larger drop on the Cougar one. Okay, and now the linen. Let's get those out of the way. Okay, and I'm kind of guessing that it's going to take longer to dry on the linen, but we'll see. So this is important to me, the Gold Color Shine, maybe the most important test, right? But I also want to see how it takes the mist. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put down my craft mat that I've just cut in half for little projects. And I'm just going to spray. Maybe I need to find one that actually sprays. Dylusions Funky Fuchsia. Okay, so there's a spray and some flicks. So I'm going to do that for each of them because I want to see, again, how they hold up to spraying, like if they take the media well and if they warp a lot or not. It's okay that it got into my gold a little bit there. I also want to see if they dry quickly or not. So I'm setting these aside to dry too. All right. So for me, I think those are all of the different ways that I would use different mediums on cardstocks. And so after I let those things dry, I'll come back and do like a little wrap. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the watercolor and mixed media effects. I'm going to zoom in for you here actually because there are some cool differences about these. Now, this is the 130-pound Cougar cardstock, and the colors blend really well on this cardstock with the watercolor. When you feel it, it has almost a chalky texture to it, but I think the watercolors look okay on it. You don't get a whole lot of pooling on here, and it took the longest for this big puddle to dry. So those are a few things to note about that. There's not a ton of warping. You can see that it's warped a little bit. I have to admit that I took my heat tool to it at the very end because I was so impatient. So just for a second on each one, and so that's just something to know. But it kept its shape fairly well. Okay, the next one behaves the most like a watercolor paper. And this is the classic, no, not classic. This is the, sorry, I keep forgetting the names of them. Basis cardstock, 110-pound. And this definitely feels more like a watercolor paper. I like the way that it pools around the edges, and you can see you get a nice blend, but you still get that watercolor texture, which I really, really like. And I don't know, I just really like this particular paper for watercoloring, and it dried the fastest. It soaked up the color nicely, and it is warped. You can see that, but not a ton. It's 110-pound. The thing I wanted to note about this is I like it for watercolor paper because it is more white than the watercolor paper that I have. It has a very similar texture, but it's a little bit more white, and I really like the idea of having it be a little bit more white. So if that's something you're interested in, it's almost the same weight. I don't know, it might be the same weight. If not, it's close. And this is just, what is that watercolor paper called? I think it's Strathmore watercolor paper. So there's that. And then on the linen, the thing I like about the linen is, okay, you get really nice blending. You don't get the pooling the way that you do on a watercolor paper. You can see the difference in the way that these look, but you do still get the shimmer through the watercolor, which I think is super cool. So you can still see the shimmeriness underneath that. And so that's something fun to play with. So I think that the watercolor was my favorite thing to use on all three of these papers. Let me show you where I just kind of pooled up the color and I used a ton of water. So this is the 130-pound Cougar cardstock. Look at the way those colors blended. I think it looks super, super cool. Now, this is one where I said that I got a little bit impatient. This took the longest to dry. I feel like there's a coating on the surface of this paper. It's very, very smooth, and so the watercolor wasn't seeping into it where I had pooled up a lot of it. And so I took my heat tool and kind of pushed it around, and look at this cool watery effect that you get when you do that. I think that I would try that effect just for fun, just to try the watercolor, to get a watery look on maybe a beach layout or something. I really, really love the way that turned out. So this was super cool for me to just think about pushing around the color. This one was the more watercolor type paper. This is the Basis cardstock, and you get the nice, I don't know if it's granulation, but the way that these colors blend together, you can see that it's watercolory. I like that look, and I liked the kind of halo edge around it, and this definitely felt the most like a watercolor. And then you have the linen, the pearlized linen, and again, this took a little while to dry, but these colors blended together so nicely, and again, you can see that sheen underneath of it. So I really like the way it looks on there as well. So I could see myself using watercolors on all three of these papers. I really, really liked it. The other mixed media things that I tried out were texture paste, and I just wanted you to see when this dried, this is very thick here, the amount of warping that you get. So there is a little bit of warping. It doesn't sit completely flat, but hardly any at all. So it didn't soak it up too much. And then with the watercolory kind of paper, the Basis cardstock, it did bow up in the middle where the where the moisture is a little bit. So it's not quite as thick as this first paper, so it did warp just a little bit. And then with the linen, same thing. It bowed up in the middle where all of that stuff was. So, but you can use texture paste on pretty much any paper. I wasn't too worried about that. Again, I really like the way when you spread it thin, how you can see the texture through here. And you do get a little bit of that shine, but basically when you use a colored texture paste, you're covering up the shine anyway. So there's the texture paste. The other thing that I tried was splatters. And here is that first paper, that 130-pound Cougar cardstock, and I really like the way that the mist dried on here. I think it looks really cool, and you get this kind of like, I don't know, interesting effect, this halo effect. The color shine dries on it like it would on my shiny photographs. So it dries in nice round little circles, and they're kind of a little bit shiny and bright. It's not quite dry, but almost. The little droplets are dry, and they've just dried a little bit shiny. And I don't mean shiny as in the gold, but I mean like the finish of it has almost a coating. I don't know if that makes sense or if you can tell what I mean, but the gold looks really good, and the droplets don't have halos around them like they do on some papers. Here is the basis cardstock, and this one, look at the difference in the sprays on these. This one doesn't have as much of that halo effect, and I don't know if it's because I sprayed more on this one, but I think it looks really nice on this one. And this isn't quite dry either, but it doesn't have that halo effect either on this paper. So I think it looks really great. And then lastly, the pearlized. This one, the color spread very differently than it did on this one, and you can see the shine underneath it, which I really think is cool. And then with the gold dots, they don't have quite as shiny of a finish. It almost looks like these ones have a clear coat on top of it, like a nail polish, but these ones look more matte, which I thought was interesting. But they look really nice, and they don't have halos around them either. So I'm happy with the way that the splatters and stuff worked on it. And then lastly, I wanted to show you, this is acrylic paint, which isn't completely dry, but I wanted to show you how much that it warped the paper. So acrylic paint can be very wet if you have a lot of it on there. There is some warping, not a ton, on that thicker 130-pound cardstock. On the 110-pound basis cardstock, there was a lot more, especially here where there's more concentrated. It bows out more, you can see that there, than it does on this side. This side's a lot more flat. And then on the linen cardstock, the whole middle part is bowed up, but I would still use it, especially if I'm just going to glue that down. So, okay, so let me go through each one of the papers again and tell you what, after I've played with them a bit, kind of what I would use each one for. So the Cougar white cardstock, the 130-pound cover stock, is the thickest paper. I really love this one for if you're going to do a single layer card and you want to do Copic coloring. I would definitely use this. Copics work great on this. I also love this for stamping on. It's nice smooth surface, and it's great for that, and I also like writing on a more smooth surface, so I definitely recommend this one. I really like it. It's nice and thick, and it just seems like a great quality, so I'm excited to use that. I do a lot of layouts on 8.5 by 11 paper, but my printer is a little bit wimpy in that it won't use thicker cardstock in it, so I'll have to try it out on my Epson my large format Epson printer, which I don't use as often, and see if I can get things to print out on this, because I think it would be really nice to have a layout, like a full page photo layout based on this kind of cardstock. The next cardstock, the basis white cardstock, is kind of what I would use as a watercolor replacement. It's a little bit more white than a watercolor paper. I love the texture of it, and that's probably what I'll use this for. The classic pearl linen cardstock is something that I would use when I want that linen texture and also a bit of shine. I really liked the way the watercolors looked on this paper when I like when it had less color, so I might try the smushing technique on this kind of paper. And I don't really love it for much else, but I really liked it for that. So those are my thoughts on these cardstocks. Don't forget that they have all kinds of different colors. They can customize cut sizes for you. It's called cardstock.com. They have custom card sizes. You can, all sorts of things. I would go and check them out at cutcardstock.com. And thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of little look and play at some of these white cardstocks if you're looking for some options.